Hey guys, how's it going? Been a little bit, or at least it feels like a little bit. Whew. How you guys doing? Nice. Well, still the weekend for me. Here in the U.S., it's today is Labor Day. So I'm off today. Yeah, which would have been nicer if I hadn't been sick most of the 3-day weekend. But yeah, I thought I'd drop back in here. I've been working on the catch up with Leah with the solo RPG. I've got most things figured out, I think. It was tough. I went back in to try to recover what I could of the video files and just wasn't successful, so computer was down, so I wasn't able to sort of pull the VOD from Twitch. So that episode is just kind of lost vaporware content right now. It's in the ether, so I kind of just have my notes and where we left off last time and my memory. It's now many weeks later of the big things that happened. So I've got kind of an idea of what happened for most of it, not obviously all the details, and I lose track about what information we got out of like the washerwomen and the drunks at the regular trial, but we'll figure that out, and we'll just override anything that I don't remember from before. But I do remember the stuff with like Ryan Fire and traveling and the things that we passed, I think, to the best of my knowledge. Pretty uneventful trip for the most part, so I think we should be good there. So I'm hoping that I'm now to the point where I just need to do like a final rerun sort of through the notes, my session notes, to see if I can tap like what threads I updated and things of that nature for information that we talked about, whether in the regular trial or on the journey, because I know we woke up and had more conversation with Dell and we got some information, I think, from the book, so fill in some of those holes, perhaps, or at least try to weave a new narrative to those holes that we already have. So, yeah, but today I wanted to talk about my sort of DM's binder. So, if you've been following the solo RPG thing that we've been doing, great, finally getting back to it. Finally had some time to actually sit down and watch the last episode and try to recover that data. Unfortunately, that didn't work, like I said. But one of the things that I do with it is I use my adventure binder, or DM's binder, this guy right here, and I'll use that, but I refer to it quite a bit in the solo RPG, which is the same thing I use when I'm running D&D out in the wild for the group. But a lot of people, have asked, oh, it'd be great to sort of like see those resources, because I mean, obviously trying to show stuff like this is not super productive. So I thought I'd do a video today where I'm going to walk through everything that's in here sort of right now, because some of the contents of it is fluid. We'll kind of talk a little bit about the organization. I've done a couple of blogs about the DM's Binder over on the website, so you can go check that out, reddragonfiend.com. And you can read more into sort of the nitty-gritty about choosing stuff. But I thought I'd give it a run over, and then I went ahead into my Google Drive, and I went in and made a link sheet with like sort of all the actual things, so I could pull it up on screen, or most of the things they pulled up on screen, so you guys could see it along with me. So you guys have a better idea of when I'm referring to it, what I'm looking at, or things if you're looking to build your own DM binder or update one that you already have, and kind of look at the things that I included in mine. And obviously, a lot of the posting that I did, a lot of the blog posts that I did, that's about this talks about looking at examples from that other people have put out on the internet, as I was doing when I was trying to figure out putting this together. And so looking at that and being like, okay, this is why I included this is why I wouldn't look at it. It's also just sort of interesting looking at different DM's needs for DMing. Like I know Crafting Hobbies is one of the ones that I looked at a lot, just because her and I are like on opposite sides of the spectrum about what we think is important to put in here and the way that we present that material, and it's really cool to see like that such a wide sort of gamut from one side to the other. Really cool. So definitely go check that out. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. I think it's that first thing. If you guys obviously have any questions, drop them in the chat. If you're watching later on YouTube, you can post things in the comments. I try to address them as possible. Just, you know, like, subscribe, share, follow, all those good things here on Twitter, or X now, and Reddit, and website, and something else I can't think of. All that stuff. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So let me pull. I do not have a good place to set this. That's not easy here. I guess I'll just set it here on top of some other stuff. My desk is pretty cluttered right now. Let's go ahead and pull the stuff up. There we go. So yeah, let me pull this up. I don't full screen it. I do not like that part about Google Docs, that it kind of really blinks it down. So if you have a relatively large monitor, it can be difficult to read through. Even when it's not being cast, obviously on the screen. So yeah, here are sort of binder contents. First thing, so I kind of wanted to talk about, first I have a couple bullet points where we talked about why I made this decision over another one for sort of organization. Again, like, the blog goes into this more in detail, but, you know, for the people who just are here for the video content, and usually when you hear binder and you're like, that's a folder, that's not a binder. Well, yeah, that's the first thing. As I was putting this stuff together and organizing how I wanted it to be organized, I realized that I wasn't going to have as much stuff in the middle. It required something like a 3-inch 3-ring binder, like one of those big chunky boys. Which is sort of what I was expecting from the initial outset, right? You hear binder, you think binder. But as I was getting more into it, I was like, you know what? I really like a folder better. It's easier to travel with, it lays flat, I can write on top of it without a problem. And yeah, so I just liked the form factor better, and then I felt like what that did is that it also made me do is sort of focus more specifically on distilling down to the things that I really, really need, because there's not a ton of space in something like this in the form factor. So I thought, rather than getting a large binder, because that was one of the things, again, I'm going to bring up Halfling Hobbies again because it's the one that I remember, the videos that I remember watching least, or watching last, not least, and just how different it is. Like, her binder was huge, and I was like, oh, well, I don't want that. I want something thin and trim. Oh, hey, how are you doing? Just kind of going over my DM binder contents. I've had a few people ask me about the DM binder contents, and about, you know, why it's this way, and then they kind of want a better look at what's inside of it, especially running the solo RPG stuff, because I often refer to it, but not in a way that, you know, anybody who's watching can. That's sort of what we're going over. So, yeah, so I decided to do the pocket folder over the binder, just to keep it thin, trim, it goes in my bag much easily. Like, binders, I feel like, have a lot of wear and tear issues, whereas a folder, you know, I have folders from, I don't know, decades ago that are practically just as good as the day that I got them. I mean, maybe a little tearing around the edges, but if I look at something, I'm not even sure I have a binder that's that old that's still together, that's been in any sort of regular usage. They just split so easily. So yeah, that was one of the main concerns. The second one was, and you probably don't get this a lot in the video, but there are no page protectors on the sheets. Most DM binders have page protectors on the sheets. And originally I was going to too, but again, with doing the smaller form factor, that really chunked up the middle section, which is obviously, like, the majority of stuff. But that also, like, for every sheet that's in here, there's 2 sheets of plastic around it. And with those around it, you know, it's just really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult to, you know, get all that content to stick in the middle really well. So I decided to forgo that, and also most of the stuff I was putting in here, sort of in the middle, is not stuff that I needed to really write on. Like, that's not really the use of most of the stuff in the reference. Most of this is like roll tables and lookups and reminders and ideas kind of things, rather than like I need to track very specific things in the binder. Because for me, that's always like a sort of a scratch pad kind of thing. So that was it. And then, so one of the big questions I get is sort of like the organization. Like, how do you organize a DM binder? And that was one of the ones that took me a long time to try to figure out what was gonna work best for me. So I was thinking, well, you know, how do you organize it? Do you organize it by... First I was gonna be like, oh, well, I'll do it by session, and then adventure, and then campaign, and then like world setting. And then I was like, oh, that would make this thing massive. Probably the biggest DM binder I've ever seen. And also, most of that stuff's not really useful for actually running D&D or another tabletop RPG. Like, I don't really need, you know, 50 pages of world building notes that I've got saved somewhere else to run the session most of the time. And that's one of the things where I thought, like, I don't use a lot of computers or tablets or anything like that at my table when I play. I'm very analog in that way. I just enjoy it a little bit better. But that is thing where I'd be like, if I was running, and somebody asked me something about a very specific campaign thing, that is the thing that I'd pull out the tablet or the laptop or the phone to go reference. Because it's going to be much easier to reference like a 50-page world setting doc online than it is to walk around with a world building Bible, right? In addition to all the other stuff you need to run something like D&D. So yeah, so that way it wasn't going to be organized. So what I instead did is I tried to focus everything in here, specifically around stuff that I need at the table most of the time. And so I kind of went with, it's not completely organized this way, but it is generally following these two sort of prescriptions that we have here. So first is sort of like session to improvisation, right? So all the reference stuff for most of the sessions and like pre-planned stuff is sort of in the front folder, the front sort of pocket of the folder, and then most of the other stuff's like improvisation aids. They're off to the side. That way, all the planned stuff's kind of in one area, and then if I need to make stuff up, it's in a totally different section. Everything's in a totally different section. And then sort of the middle section is kind of organized by sort of... I thought about doing it by play tiers, and then I was like, that's really confusing, though, to kind of flip back and forth all the time. So instead I did it by sort of like areas that the game sort of happens geographically. Like the dungeon, the wilderness, and the settlement. So having those instead in sort of like 3 bands makes it much easier to keep track of, at least for me. So like all the wilderness stuff is in one spot, all the settlement stuff's in one spot, all the dungeon stuff's in one spot. So that's how I sort of organized it. So the first thing that we have is the sidekicks. And I literally have them in here, and this is not something that I have linked up. We built those on another stream. Are these guys, and that's for sort of the current sort of Adventurers League style, almost West Marches kind of game that my friends and I are running right now because our attendance from all sides has been really spotty. So we've been trying to do a different type of game that allows us to still play without, you know, having all the problems with, you know, oh, this person didn't show up and they're, you know, this entire plot line's around their character and now we can't play, kind of thing. So they're in here, but they're not something that I usually have in here most of the time. So after that is the world calendar, the calendar sheet, which is right here, and then on the back is the agricultural chores by season. I'm bring that up real quick. Let's go ahead and pick the loot. So this is just the world calendar that I use for D&D. It's definitely based on 365-day year. This is sort of our standard international calendar is. It's just broken up a little bit differently. Broken up into 4 seasons with 3 turns in each season, 3 months of each season. And there are 6 weeks of 5 days per week. And so then that's why the numbering looks the way that it does. So 11 is actually, you know, the first day of the first month of that season. Or the first, it's the first day of the first week of the season. So if you saw a date stamp that said Spring Maiden 11, you'd know that that's, okay, the first day of the first week of spring. And then all the bolded ones at the end are Souls Day, which is sort of like the traditional weekend day off. So there's 1 day off and 4 days of work, basically. And so yeah, that's how it's set up, and so I just follow it that way. Very simple, it's very uniform, and it makes it very easy to address when celestial events are happening, because that's the way that the months are set up. And so we have these sort of days that happen, these sort of they are basically, I don't even know how to say it. They're basically days that, celebration days or observance days that sit outside the normal calendar. So, like, for example, New Year's Day is not on a specific day of a month. It is it sits between months, sort of. They're like little buffers, which is very interesting. The same thing for, like, High Autumn is the equinox, right? The vernal equinox. Or sorry, vernal. It's the autumnal equinox. So yeah, and then, right, we have a fourth day, which is just leap day. So once every 4 years, get an extra day. Yeah, so that's that. And then on the back, I have agricultural chores by season. You can actually get this document in a much prettier fashion over on DriveThruRPG. You can pick that up and take a look at it if you're really interested in it. So instead, this is one of the things that went back in is that I broke it up by week. So, say I think in Leah we are in. I'm trying to remember. I think we're in Spring Mother. I think we're like Spring Mother or something. But let's pick a different day just in case. Let's say Summer Crone 43. Okay. So down here we go to, okay, so I broke it up. So Summer Crone's up here. So the 4th week of that is, so they're threshing and winnowing grain. This is just helpful to give a little bit extra flavor to D&D that's in that sort of like rustic frontier area, or especially how rural the time period's supposed to be. It's that you always get the things, right, like the villagers are always working in the fields, but you're like, what are they doing in the fields? And the reason that I put this in is kind of a personal reason. Again, I like to try to add some like historical verisimilitude into the game. And this kind of comes from the U.S. school system summer vacation. So we have vacation in summer. And a lot of old wives' tale reasoning is that, oh, you know, you have to send the kids home to work on the fields during the summer. And, you know, on my mother's side, you know, the family is very much into the sort of farming side of life. So like there's not a lot to do during the summer on the farm, right? That's probably the least busy time other than maybe the middle of winter, because you're basically waiting on crops to grow. So there's actually not a ton to do most of the time, especially when the lighter times. It's usually when they're doing some other stuff, and it's usually when food stores are at their lowest before the harvest. But yeah, so I added that in just to make it a little bit more so I can tell them like exactly what the people are doing in the fields instead of just villagers are just doing stuff. Makes it a little bit easier, at least in my mind. So yeah, that's that. Like I said, you can get one of these on DriveThruRPG, and this other one, I mean, you could, I guess, borrow this calendar, but I mean, it's pretty simple to make your own, whatever's going to work best for you. And so I wanted to make a calendar that worked very easily for me, so that's what I did. So yeah, that's the first thing that's in here, sort of in the front pocket, usually. And after that, after the calendar sheet, is the session sheet, which I've got right here. Now, usually if you're running an actual session, like this is your prep sheet for that session. And we've gone over this already on another stream a few months ago. And talking about like how to fill it out. And it's really useful. It's really, the session sheet itself is more for an ongoing campaign. It's not particularly suited to trying to use that format to run a one-shot. Whereas that's more using the adventure skeleton, which is sort of like the next part. The session sheet. And this is also where I put like additional notes, like from last time, like recap notes, things like that, that weren't included in this part, which is obviously the first part of the session sheet. So you do your recap, figure out how you want to start the session so you get this stuff moving very quickly. Outline sort of the most likely to occur encounters in your mind. Like they said they were going to do this one thing, so assuming they go here, they might go here or here. And then trying to use that, because we really only know, I said this when we went over the sheet in more detail, that you really only know the first scene of any game session. After that, you know, the players and their characters are going to do whatever they're going to do. So these are more just sort of ideas. The most likely to occur scenes that you think are going to happen. And then 5 to 7 interscene fluffs or interactions. These are sort of like small things that happen in between there. They're really useful for sort of like padding out runtime or bringing levity to a situation. Or if you're like, oh, we haven't had a fight in a while, well, maybe I put in something that can become sort of a fight. Just sort of short little things that you can kind of put in there just to kind of fill out things, kind of flesh out the whole skeleton session. Especially, they're really useful for, say if your party, you know, said they were going to do A and they decided to do B, like, you know, do a pivot right in the middle of the session. You can use these to sort of like put as sort of stumbling blocks in front of them to sort of like fill up game time so at least you can get to the end of the session. Because the nice thing is that if you can get to the end of this session, then you can actually prep for the next session. So that's all the foresight that we need sort of at the table, is how do I run a fun game, deal with what my players gave me, and make it to the end of the session so I can answer the questions that they have now put in front of me. That's sort of the idea there. And at the end, right, the three-step session end, which is one of the most important things. If you're trying to prep for an adventure, you got to know what they're going to do next. So make sure that they tell you what they're going to do next. And then, right, we do the countdown timers, which is the next thing I think that's in here, actually, or after Adventure Skeleton. Make your own session recap, blah, blah, blah. And then at this bottom stuff is like, so these are the things, this first page is like, here are the things that I'm definitely going to prep for the next session. And then the bottom things are like, hey, if I have extra prep time, maybe I'll look at making a handout or some sort of tactile resource for the game. Put together some maps and miniatures. I run most of my stuff Theater of the Mind. That's just, I don't know. 5e, I feel like, runs that very well, and maps and miniatures are nice. I've got a whole bunch of miniatures, got plenty of maps. I just feel like in the end, it doesn't end up adding as much to the game that I think people think it does by watching. And then maybe that's just my perception. I think that people who watch actual plays, like videos of actual plays, whether it's Critical Role, Dimension 20, anything like that, it's such a showcase that people expect that at their game. Like, they can't have fun without that sometimes. And I'm like, that's nice, but I'd rather have a really good adventure and not have maps and miniatures than have really good maps and miniatures and have an adventure that really sucks. Then it's definitely not going to be memorable anyways. Right, so that's why I put that stuff sort of on the back. It's like, I want to make sure the stuff up front's good first. With those solid bones before I start putting out, all the sort of nice and flashy details. And then updating any sort of improvisation resources. which are some of the things that go in here, or some of the things that go with the adventure itself. Yeah, so that's it. Session sheet is very nice. I very much recommend using it or something like it. Or in a lot of ways, it's very similar to the Fly, Flourish, Lazy DM kind of advice. How he kind of sets things up. It's not exactly the same. We have some differences about what we think is important and what we don't think is important, but they are very similar. But something like that, something that gives you sort of like a rubric, so you know what to prep, right? Which I think is the hardest thing to learn about prep as a DM. Is to know which things to prep, right? Because the answer can't be everything, but the answer can't be nothing at all either. I mean, it can. There are people who try to run D&D 100% improv. I have played with a number of those DMs, and I can tell you from experience with those DMs, if they prep even a little bit, their game is definitely better. Even if they don't like the prepping aspect, it's always better if they prep some. It just is. That's always been my experience. For the adventure skeleton, so that is used in conjunction with the session sheet. So obviously the session sheet is about very specific, what are you doing in this game session? The adventure skeleton is sort of like the overall adventure you're playing. Right, the next layer. And yeah, so there's stuff in here. I think we've gone over this too. I've definitely gone over it many times on the blog. I think we've gone over it in video too. But it kind of just sets out that building an adventure pretty quickly. You know, having a good idea to start from, having some motifs that kind of help you sort of like create creative blockers. Adventure motifs, which are like a shorthand tool. This is from somebody at D&D at WotC specifically talked about this, and I don't think it was Chris Perkins. Maybe it was Mike Merles talking about creating adventures and how the motifs are very helpful, because it gives you like an archetype to kind of lean on as a crutch or a helpful tool whenever you need it, whenever your mind's drawing a blank. The adventure scope and style, you know, what's going to be involved in it. Are you doing like a one-shot? Is this a one-session thing? Is this going to be like a 5-session thing? Try to figure that out so you know how to plan for it, and what kind of style it is. You know, is it a heist? Is it an intrigue? Is it a dungeon crawler? Is it kicking in doors and slaying the works, or whatever it is? Making sure that you have a good mix of pillars. I think this is kind of the way that I set up is like a 50, 33%, 17%. So there's definitely like a specific focus on adventures. Like, hey, this is definitely going to be a very combat heavy. Like, it's going to be mostly X, some Y, little Z. So it could be like, this can be mostly combat, some social stuff, and very little exploration. So they know that it's going to be very straightforward. So it kind of gives you an idea of sort of like what kind of encounters or scenes to kind of think about when you're coming up with something like that. So it keeps a very consistent tone. It talks about, you know, things, big bad evil guy, who are they and what do they want, all that good stuff. Timers, which is putting a time constraint on adventures, which is very useful, especially for things like dungeon delves. Like, you need to do X by Y, right? And it really helps a lot with that sort of 15-minute workday that a lot of DMs struggle with, because players, you know, go in, they blow up all the monsters and use all their spells, and they're like, all right, well, we're going to sleep. Get everything back. We're going to take our long rest now. Right, and how to have reasons to, in-world reasons for that not to be okay. You're like, that's fine, but you're supposed to get this back in 24 hours. So are you really going to take an 8-hour nap in the middle of that? Those sort of things. It kind of talks about, breaks it down by the adventure opening, framing event, inciting incident, call to action. Like I said, we've gone over this stuff already. And in the middle, sort of like being underway, sort of setback or turn or twist, that sort of thing. Underway 2, climax, introduction, the climax, and then the final danger, and then the finale and transition. This is all broken down. This is very, very boilerplate, straightforward, creating a narrative advice. And this is very useful if you... I like this for non-dungeon, non-location based adventures, where you need a little bit more structure, whereas doing like a dungeon delve, you don't really need this as much because the dungeon gives you the structure. Right, and I think this is where you see like the old school and the new school kind of up against each other, right? Where a lot of old school people from OSR sort of side are very character focused, so they're like, yeah, we'll go in the dungeon, we're trying to get rich, we're trying to become nobles, we're trying to do all this stuff. And then you have the other side of the game where it's like, no, I want to do this sort of like investigation, or I want to play, you know, CSI Faerun or whatever they want to do. And it's right, it's about the story, and there's a bunch of passion and talking to a bunch of things and trying to get a lot of mysteries done, which there are adventures like that in older editions of D&D and the OSR, but I don't feel they work, or they're structured quite the same way for success as new adventures are, but they're just very different styles of play. And so I feel like this specifically is very helpful for sort of that newer side. So if you're a new person that's sort of getting into D&D and getting into sort of the DM's chair, and you want to do more things to those sort of like sort of the published adventures and things like that, or like live plays, actual plays, but this setup's probably going to work a lot better for you than some of the OSR DM advice. Not different. I like both ways. I think they're both fun, and I think it's fun to run both in the same kind of campaign. Where sometimes you're just dungeon delving and going after your own personal stuff, and then sometimes there's a bigger narrative about stuff. Once they decide whether things are important to them or not. A good way to sort of like pull them in with that. The last one is our campaign countdown timers. The sheet right here, it doesn't have anything on it right now. But let's go back to it. And I've talked about this before with the resource supply dice. But we can pull it up real quick. There's not a lot to look at here. So basically this just abstracts time for when things are going to happen. It's very similar to the clocks aspect of Blades in the Dark and other games that follow that same sort of basic system. I learned about this before that system was ever coming out, as sort of a resource die mechanic for like tracking rations and water and things like that. Sort of abstracting that rather than ticking off boxes. The idea being that basically once per session, after the players have made some choice or they've done some action, you're like, okay, well there's definitely going to be some sort of thing that happens because of that. Like if you make a decision, there's going to be consequences of some sort. Those could be good consequences, those could be bad consequences based off of, how everything shakes out. And so this basically helps track that. So every time after a session, and you have to think about like how quickly you want this to whip back around. So let's say that they're maybe first level adventurers, and they, grab a goblin that's filling up water skins at the river, and they interrogate the goblin. This is basically the beginning of Vandelver, actually, right? You grab the goblin, interrogate the goblin, and then you set the goblin free, and then go in and massacre the rest of his goblinoid clan, family, tribe, whatever that unit is called. And you're like, okay. So then I'd set up a campaign countdown timer for that goblin, right? When is that goblin gonna show up again? And if they're first level, it's probably gonna be like a 1d6. I definitely don't want to set it out at like 1d20. And usually I'll do it by ascending order. So basically that means that at the end of every session I'll roll a d6, because I assigned a d6 to it. If I roll a 1, it goes down to a 1d4. Then after every session I roll a 1, and if I roll a 1 on the 1d4, it goes down to 1, and that means, hey, after the next session, this goblin's going to show up at some point. Then it clicks down to 0. And then once it clicks down to 0, it's basically, they're going to show up in this session, in this next session, or as early as seems plausible. for this character to just kind of show up. And then they have to figure out, like, are they going to be happy with the PCs? Are they going to be upset with the PCs? I mean, they didn't kill the goblins. They also killed everybody the goblin was with, but I guess that depends on how they felt about the people they were with. And, right, you can make that determination as a DM, how you feel about it, or roll for it randomly. And they'll show up in maybe some random scene to either help the PCs or to hurt the PCs and hinder them in some way, keep them from their goal, all sorts of fun stuff. So that's how the campaign countdown timers basically work. And that's the full sort of front pocket. So that was the front pocket. That's basically, like I said, all the sort of like prep resources. Most of that stuff's in the front pocket. There's stuff that is very specific to the session and the adventure I'm running. And then we have sort of the middle section, which we definitely will see run from that dungeon to wilderness to settlement area. So the first part up is vendor resources, so it's actually this page, the front page of the middle section. Front page of the middle section right here, so you can kind of, that's this one. And that's going to be, I don't really need to, well, I'm going to hold on to this just in case. But I won't need to show you most of the stuff in the middle section because I've got good links to most of it. And so the first thing that kind of comes up are these sort of like resources. So they're just sort of quick references. Hey, here are the actions you can take in combat. Here's what most of the conditions do. Written in my own shorthand, right? Obviously not raw, but it's written in my own shorthand. Hey, here's the levels of exhaustion. I've got my own 1d20 GM oracle in there, right? So when I'm like, and I probably wouldn't need this anymore, right? I think I've even changed it a little bit from what we actually use in Leah's solo game, but it's very similar. And I wouldn't probably need to put it in there now, like I've got that so hard-coded in my brain now that I probably don't need to actually have it written down. Refer to. This is one of my favorite ones, the 1d10 monsters pre-battle. I almost put a reaction roll in there, which is one of the things that I like from old school D&D that's not really in current D&D. I mean, it is, but it's not like made a point of. But like what the monsters are doing before you fight them, basically. Right, so you roll a d10, some dice. Alright, so let's say, use our fancy roller. A 4. Okay, so let's say we rolled a 4 because they're sneaking up on a camp of hobgoblins. Alright, so, alright, so they would be doing 4. Bathing, cleaning, first aid, grooming. Let's say that they're doing first aid. So maybe they've had a scuffle and now they're like bandaging each other. That's the scene that you come from. They came with hobgoblins who look like they've been in a scuffle, been in some sort of fight. They're taking care of each other. And maybe your players are like, oh, well, you know, if we're in a position of power, maybe we want to go talk to them instead of just trying to attack or sneak around them. Maybe they give us some information about what hurt them if it's dangerous. It could be a threat to us as well. And they're like, alright, well, because I know the reaction roll sort of off my head, 10's pretty good. So, 10, yeah, they're going to be welcoming, I mean, they're going to be a little bit guarded because they've got their butts kicked, but if they're going to seem friendly, open to trade, things like that. Which is a nice thing to run. I mean, I like that sort of aspect of old school D&D. Is like, hey, there's a group of monsters over there. That doesn't mean you have to go fight them. You can ignore them, you can go around them, you can try to talk to them. Right? Especially, like, these are hurt hobgoblins. I mean, if you want to have a fight with them, I guess you can have a fight with them. And you'll probably win it, depending on how many there are. But you could get some useful information out of them, right? Just by talking, asking, offering to also apply first aid to people, right? Those sorts of things can be really helpful. And then, right, if they do that, if they did that, maybe they decide to sit down, they share some of their healing resources with them. Maybe use a spell here or there, and bandage them up, they get some information out of them, and then maybe they give the hobgoblin some information. or supplies, and now I can add them to something like the countdown timer and be like, hey, there's that group of like hobgoblin raiders. They could show up at some point. You guys did them a solid, so who knows? Maybe they'll show up and help at some point. That'd be cool, right? It's about sort of like making sure those things don't just, as my English teacher long time ago used to say, characters that go off to the island of misfit toys that get lost forever. They just walk off screen in stories and never come back. Instead of being like, hey, you did a thing, and the impact of what you do in the world may come around in a very karma kind of system and come back and help you, or hinder you later in unexpected ways. Yeah, and then down here we have some improvised numbers, like attacks if you need to make up a monster really quickly. Right, just like a real quick, you just want to make a custom random monster. You're like, oh, I wasn't expecting to do this one thing, and now I don't know what the stats for that thing is, and I don't have that prepared, and D&D Beyond's down, so I can't look it up or whatever. Like, here, let me make up a creature real fast. Limited damages, one of my favorite things. Rolling random DCs. Yep. Never all that. If you guys have watched the solo RPG, you've seen me use this a lot, where I randomly come up with a DC. This is sort of how that's done. Here I have just the 2d6 variant, but I usually use 3d6 instead of doubling the... And... Oh, no, this talks about 3d6. Okay. So, yeah, I don't really need this one because I know that one very well by heart. But it's really useful to just be able to set random DCs and be like, I guess this was a really... It is dangerous, right? You have to be willing to go with the results with it if you're going to use it. Otherwise, you can kind of do the normal D&D 5e thing. It's like, oh, for an average challenge, set it somewhere between 13 and 17, and that's probably fine. Because this can give you very drastic results. You can end up with like, oh, this random slums, tenement building has a lock on it. It's got like a DC 22 to pick. Of course, if you're using the improvisation the ways that it's supposed to be, and you're going, you're taking information, doing your yes ands, and you're like, okay, so something clearly very valuable is behind this door. What is somebody keeping that's very valuable that's in this sort of tenement building in the slums? This noble's mistress? Is it, could be something like that, smuggler's den, right? Now we can start running away with it. How to do chases and escapes. This is sort of, I ended up putting it in here because it's really, chases and escapes can be run in the dungeon and the wilderness, and I was like, there's no reason for me to basically make the same table twice. So I just combined them towards the end of the dungeon thing, so it's just on the cusp of the wilderness, so it shows up on the facing page, basically. Yeah, so you roll successes before failures. This kind of comes out of the skill challenge from 4th edition. It runs pretty well. It's kind of fun thing to do that's not just straight combat and not straight talking. It's really good. I find it very useful because I often present encounters in which bad guys don't fight to the end. They're often going to try to run away if they can. And so that means sometimes you chase them. And chasing them through D&D standard, like I move 30 and try to do a thing to make them slow down, or I just dash or use a spell to make everybody run faster. It's very slow, very plodding. So I have a different sort of like chase and escape thing that's a little bit faster, and it's been like, hey, we're completely out of combat now, and we're switching over to this totally different system. Rather than trying to use the combat system for what is essentially non-combat use. And below that we just have proficiencies lists, and I have them numbered so I can roll them randomly if I ever need to. Because for some reason, well, not some reason, I did some changes in here. It's not, because I decided to, instead of put every single instrument, I just put bands of instruments. And so that way that would give me 50 proficiencies, so I could roll proficiencies very easily with a D100 and just cut the results in half. Very fun. So yeah, that's sort of the first, kind of bits in here. So after that, there is improvised casters. These, I think these were already in there. I did, yeah. I just named here. So yeah, then we have, and this is the next page that's in here. Like I said, you're not gonna need to look at most of this. Just kind of helps me with improvised traps and hazards. Like if I do. So if you guys have been following along with the solo RPG thing, right? Basically, what happens is Lee goes into a room. She tries to take a look at what's in the room, if there's any threats in the room. If she determines that there's a trap in the room, well, now I can make up a trap basically on the spot with a couple of rolls. Which actually, let's just do it real quick. It's not foolproof, because there are some gonzo results in here. It doesn't really take into account what style of game you're running. So 4, what kind of trap? Okay, it's a murder trap. That means it's something that specifically tries to kill its victim. And a 3 and a 1. So it's some sort of incorrect interaction with it that sets it off. And it's a one-time trap. It doesn't reset. Okay. So this is definitely like very classic Raiders of the Lost Ark. You take the idol, the boulder comes down and rolls after you, right? It's clearly trying to squish you and the idol. Weirdly, it's going to squish the idol too. Made up of solid gold, apparently. And so that's going to happen, and there's no real reset to it. Like somebody would have to come back and roll a gigantic boulder all the way back, but then the entire temple fell apart, which hard to tell if that was part of the trap or not. So, yeah, but that's sort of how they're set up. Sort of like the... I'm trying to think, like... Skyrim traps kind of fall into that area, too. I mean, a lot of them do have resets, though. Actually, most of them do, right? But tripwire ones don't, right? Tripwire ones don't. I mean, technically you could manually reset it, but that's basically building a new trap at that point. So yeah, so improvised traps and hazards, things to kind of put in the dungeon. Right? Oh, like here's a disease area. Sorry, I keep forgetting that this kind of is small on you guys. Here we go. Like, oh, this next room is flooded for some reason. Oh, that's weird. Right. We have some just random dungeon encounters. These are just sort of the generic dungeon encounters. Like, these could happen in any type of dungeon, right? You could run into adventurers or humanoids, some orcs, some bricks or mimics, you know, things that just kind of show up in random dungeons of all types. And that's it. So after that is sort of the dungeon dressing. So dungeon dressing, I do have a sheet. Actually, is it not in this one? Oh yeah, so it's the last page, sorry. So encounter quick matchups. If you guys have the Xanathar's Guide, it's the exact same table, I think, or very similar table. I may have used that with a different homebrew one that I thought was a little closer to on par. But just if I need to make an encounter real quick, I can do that. A throwaway encounter. And then 1d20 dungeon dressing. Okay, so let's say that we had that flooded chamber. Okay, what's some dungeon dressing that's in there? 6. Okay, some sort of vermin that's in there. So maybe it's full of leeches or something like that. Ooh. Try to leech onto you and... gross. So yeah, I mean, basically it's stuff that helps you, like, sort of juice up the description, right? I like this one. Message, right? Graffiti, warnings, magic scrawls on walls, and cool things. Just things for, you know, the players to find and ask questions about and determine if maybe that's, you know, something that you want to start incorporating into the game through improvisation or not. Elaborate ornamentation, right? you run into a cave room that suddenly got like a bunch of bearskin rugs and like a nice 4-poster bed and like a throne like chair in it, and you're like, wait, what? Fun things to throw in there. And so I also have, in addition to this, the 100 pieces of minor and major dungeon dressing, and that's actually from Pathfinder book, which I'll grab real quick. This is actually from the first edition Pathfinder Game Master Guide. I don't remember what page it's on, but well, it'll tell me. 181. And that is actually the perfect crossover. It's page 181 and 182. Which is why I chose to put it at the end. 81. So 81's got the minor and major dungeon dressings. And then the next page on it, the other side of that page, starts with the different types of random encounters for different areas. Now, obviously, those are Pathfinder monsters, so if you're running 5e, they aren't going to necessarily work. But you can always take a look at it and come up with, and either use that specific thing, which may or may not be their level, and depending on your game, you may or may not care about that very much. As long as you make it clear that you telegraph, right, that this is a threat that is way beyond your kin, right? In 5e, which might have been a very easy encounter in Pathfinder 1. But that leads directly into our next page, which is wilderness dressing. Go ahead and take a look at that. So yeah, these are basically just a bunch of 1d20 roll tables based on different biomes. So these are the things that, like, for the solo RPG, when I roll a 1, I'm like, oh, there's some sort of, like, wilderness encounter that happens. This is what I'm usually going to roll on next. And sometimes I roll 1d20, and sometimes I roll 2. Let's look at dressing. Let's run coast/water. So sometimes I'll just roll 1. Sometimes I'll roll 2 and be like, I'll pick whichever one seems to fit the best or interest me the most. So 6 and 14. Finds of underwater wreckage. Abundant fishing available. Right, depending on where you are in this journey, you might pick one of the other ones. If you're like, oh, well, they haven't come across, like, any loot in a while, or haven't really had a combat, maybe you're like, oh, well, let's do the underwater wreckage. And then go down there and, oh, maybe there's, like, a nasty reef clog down there. Hawkwag and who knows what. Maybe some Kuatoa, maybe some Tritons, you know, all sorts of things can be down there for you to fight underwater. Or to fight, you know, on the coast. Maybe there's a big, like, seagull-style rock that comes in and tries to attack them while they're out on the beach, kind of like, you know, very World War II fighter plane, like, zooms down on them and tries to pick them off as they're running across the beaches. That'd be fun. And maybe if they're just kind of having a chill time, or maybe they're just going across a lake, you're like, hey, you notice that there's actually a lot of fish here. If you guys want to maybe take some time, you get to and try to forage for some food. If you wanted to try to fish here, if you have things to do that, you know, maybe you get to roll with advantage with that, or maybe you get to roll twice for how much, you know, rations you recover for that. Tell you how well you did with your fishing. Yeah, something fun like that. So yeah, I mean, that's all the sheet's for. Just fun extra stuff, just kind of, like we talked about, sort of those extra sort of dressing things. See, prepping something like that, like having these sorts of resources are much more important to me as a DM from a narrative style than being like, oh, I'm going to spend like an hour looking for, you know, hours maybe a little hyperbolic. Spend quite a bit of time looking for like the perfect map for one encounter. Instead I'm like, yeah, I want to come up with some stuff so they're not bored by the travel aspect while still making it feel like time is going on, like they're crossing terrain. So I find like creating things like this much more helpful, much more useful for me than being like, I needed to look up that one specific like shipwreck map that we were gonna have for that encounter, and then figure out, you know, how many how many Kuoto we're gonna have in it. Whatever. Right, it gives me a lot more functionality when I'm not. I guess that's what it kind of comes down to a lot in the end, is that for me, I like the versatility of not being tied to the maps, because I could very easily waste a lot of time looking for, you know, 2 or 3 different maps, and then the party not go to those locations that are going to make those maps useful. And I'm like, well, I just wasted a lot of time working on that, and they weren't useful for me. Now, other DMs, and I'm not in this ilk, but I know a lot do, have basically folders where they save a bunch of different maps, kind of by biome, kind of set up like this, or specific types of dungeons, and they save them there, so that way they have those resources. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great if that's the type of game you're running. If that's what makes you feel prepared as a DM, go for it. I mean, it's definitely nice. I've definitely played with DMs that do that. They're like, oh yeah, you randomly came across a ruins of an ancient fort. It's like, obviously, this was not a plan, right? We know from the metagame perspective as players, be like, obviously this wasn't planned. And the DM goes and is like, and here's the layout of this ruined tower, because they, you know, had a ruined tower or keep or whatever saved, and so they have that, and then they just have to worry about, you know, some of the other things. Like, they don't have to worry about how many rooms are in the dungeon or anything like that. They just have to stock the dungeon as you go through it. Which, yeah, no, I'm 1000% seeing that being helpful. Even for myself, I'm just like, I'm probably just not going to put in the amount of time it would take to build that resource. Especially because then I would have to figure out how to load them all up to, like, a VTT if I was using that, and that's a lot of back-end work that's from maybe sometimes resource. So, that's why I haven't done it. But I do think it's very cool. So after that, we have some very similarly. So we have the dressing by biomes, and then we have random encounters by biomes. Very simple. And most of these are very similar to what's in. They're not one for one, but they are very similar to what is in Xanathar's Guide. The Xanathar's Guide, in my opinion, is probably the best D&D 5e book. In general, it's both useful for players and dungeon masters, which is rare, and basically equal measures, which is also very rare. And so they scale up. So, like, it starts off like very easy. So the first 3 are very easy. The 4 and 5 are more difficult, and then 6 is you're having a bad day. And so I basically broke it down by tier. So 1 through 3 are things that are in sort of that levels 1 through 4 adventure tier. And then 4 and 5 are random things you're going to run into in sort of the 5 to 10 adventure levels. And then 6 is like 11 plus. So if you're, you know, a 3rd level party and you're running through the jungle, and you come across, you know, 3 giant boars. And again, this is a lot about telegraphing. That does put the impetus on you as a DM, and that's why it's laid out this way. So I know very quickly looking at it, being like, hey, this is a level 3 party, or whatever I said. These are like 3 giant boars. Like, they're gonna destroy this party. Like, I need to make that sure that is very apparent. It's like, hey, if you go to try to fight even probably one of these things, you're gonna have a bad day. It may wipe you. And fighting all of them is definitely going to wipe you. Yeah, it's set up the same way, so it's got basically the same biome setup. Did I miss anything from there? No. Alright, so on the back side of that is the wilderness reference section, which is basically all the sort of like ruling stuff that usually only comes up when you're doing exploration kind of stuff. Like, hey, how much damage do you take when you fall? Well, you know that you take d6 per 10 feet, so 20 d6 max. Hey, how fast do I go when I swim? You go half speed. Hey, how far can I long jump? Right? And so all those sorts of very specific rules that typically only come up in sort of like the exploration phase. I mean, sometimes jumps come up during combat, but it's not It's not as often, I feel like. Unless you put like a bunch of water, and once you do that, people will know that. And then visibility. Talking about, and this is sort of map stuff for me. This is, like, again, this is sort of very much a DM's reference. So when I'm looking at that, and then I have sort of like, if you're following along with the solo game, you know I have that hex map pulled up, and I'm looking at the hex map, and I can be like, oh, well, it's a clear day, so you can definitely see that, you know, in the next hex is forest. Right. That sort of thing. And then, like, what things like cover and concealment do to your visibility and light. Food and rations, we talked about the half rations, and what happens if you don't have rations, holding your breath, and the supply dive, which we literally just talked about. Except that how I use it for things like rations and arrows and things of that nature. Ooh, there you go. Very dry, I guess. And so, a lot of this is just very straightforward. I guess, or at least it seems straightforward to me, but I've been looking at this stuff for a while now. Like, I've had this binder in basically its current form for, I guess, the better part of a year at this point, right? Like, I know that stuff. So it seems very straightforward to me, but I know for you guys it's probably not. For a lot of you, it's the first time seeing any of this. So exploration and travel. So this goes into basically how I do local exploration and how that's different from local land travel. And you'll be familiar with this if you've been watching our solo RPG session. Like I said, this is how most of these resources get used. About, oh, well, we break camp and this is our pace, and the pace, and then do we start to push, and if we push, then we get exhausted. These are the sort of things that come up as we're like traveling from hex to hex to find things. And then, right, we have the 12s, the D12 roll, we roll at 12, and it's wilderness dressing, and if you roll a 1, it's the encounter, and that's why we have those things in here. And then what you do at the end of the day. And trying to do morale checks. I usually don't run them, haven't been running morale checks for the solo RPGs. I think that's more of a fun thing to do when you're running for an actual party of players. Knowing how to recover from, you know, the exhaustion, because I do it a little bit differently. You have to spend basically an entire day at camp resting. Can't be. You don't get, if you're exhausted, that 8 hours of sleep to get up to travel another, like, 8 hours of hiking, you're not going to be any less exhausted, probably. And then after that is sort of our overland travel section. And so this is when I'm like, alright, so in my mind, exploration is like you're looking for something, right? What I call sometimes... And they say it sometimes, an old sort of like maritime navigation is you're trying to hit the box, which is why we have the vision information. Think about you're trying to get close enough to your target that you're basically able to see it. So like, are you trying to do that in whatever you're trying to do? So, for example, in the solo RPG that we're running, right, our missing episode right now, is that we were legitimately looking for Ott, right? We're looking for Ott's position. And so we had a general search area, and we had to get to that search area and then look within that search area. That's very much the exploration thing. Whereas traveling to Carjuntan from Split Valley Oasis, that's just travel, right? We're not trying to do anything in there. We're not looking around. We're not stopping to look for stuff. And so we use the overland travel rules for that. Trying to connect. Alright. Everything okay? Not sure. I'm just gonna keep going. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so overland travel is just basically what I do instead. right? And then instead of like rolling randomly, we're going to set up some travel nodes, which is like, hey, you're going to travel a week. There's 1d4 things that might happen. So hey, we're going to do, let's say we're doing 2 weeks of travel. Oh, and they roll really low, so only 2 adventure nodes during that. And be like, okay, so here are the 2 things that are going to happen on your trip. 19. So you run into some sort of wildlife. That's going to be an encounter that you do. And what's the other one for? And some bad weather. You're going to run into a spike of bad weather. One of those sort of weather permutations that kind of shows up out of nowhere. That's it. So we might go, oh, you're going to run into this wildlife. Are they curious? Wary? Hostile? And then that's one of those things where I'll take like the 2d6, does a little bell curve. Okay, they're wary. Again, right, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it could be like, could be something if you want it to be something. Right, and you get to determine the wildlife, right? It could be one creature, it could be like a whole herd of something. Right, if you were like, oh, there's a herd of yaks, wild yak. And you're like, up, and they're kind of in the way, and they're wary, and then maybe there's a predator that comes and attacks, and maybe there's a stampede that comes your way. Right, there's lots of fun things you can. Right, there, which would put them very much in either hostile or curious, but definitely the wary area. Right, and maybe that's why they're wary, because there's a predator hunting them. And kind of give them something fun to do, sort of on the travel as they get there. So we did that. That's overland traveling. And so that's sort of the second bit of the middle section, which leaves the finale of the middle section, which is sort of where I stuck all the settlement stuff. So we went from dungeon, the wilderness stuff, talking about doing overland travel, exploration, things of that nature. Now we're going to talk about sort of the social stuff. So yeah, like I said, I kind of broke this middle section down into 3 sections. There is dungeon, that place that's in between the dungeon and the town, and then now we're focusing on the town. Right. Very natural place. So like if you start off in the dungeon and you're moving back towards town, you can just kind of move that way through the binder. And then like if they're getting ready to gear up to go out, I'm like, alright, we're in this back section, and then I just move to the section before it. Right, it's structured so there's not like, oh, I need to go from here necessarily all the way to the other side, unless of course we run into a combat and I need to look up something specifically for combat. Or the dungeons in the city. I mean, you can have a dungeon in a city, like Undermountain, right? Obviously. So let's go ahead and pull up the settlement resources. Ow! Yep. So you guys can see it. There we go. So the first thing I have in here is what's happening in town. So a lot of times in a lot of games I feel like towns are extremely static, right? There's usually not anything that's going on in them. And so basically the way that I remedy that is being like, hey, there's something that's gonna happen happen in town once every 12 times you go there. So not this time. See how many it would actually take me to get. Well, could be a lot of times. Because I didn't want it to be like, depending on the type of adventure you're running, especially if you're running a very old school adventure or West Marches type where they're like always going to the town. They're always entering the town like every session. After a session of play. Like you obviously don't really necessarily want something to happen every single time they show up in town. Yep, well, there you go. It's what, the 13th time they show up in town. Something happens. But if you're running like a local game and they're coming back and forth to town very regularly, oftentimes multiple times each session, depending on what they're trying to do, maybe that makes sense. And be like, okay, so what's going on? Yep, 1. Traveling acrobats, circus, or players are in town. You can pick up maybe a circus show, maybe you show off one of your characters can show off one of their acrobatics, right? Join it, be a performer, right? Be a strong man if they're like the person with a bunch of strength can go one-on-one with like a circus strongman or something like that. That'd be fun. Right? Just kind of gives you options of interesting things to do while you're playing the game. So after that is settlement reference, which is just sort of quick notes I have about a town. Let's say we went back to a place that had, I don't know, and yeah, let's say like 800 people in it, or 700 people, and 750. Right, that's the middle of those two numbers. I can do math, probably. All right, so it reminds me that buying power is 10%. So if there are 750 people in here, I just take away a 0, and I know that people who are coming into town, if they're looking to barter, if they're trying to sell off treasure or buy stuff, buy supplies, they can pretty readily find anything that's up to about 75 gold in value. That means, like, if you have a bunch of 50 GP gems, there are people there to buy them. If you're trying to sell a 200 GP gem, yeah, you probably need to go to a larger city to sell that off. There's probably not somebody who's got enough scratch to, buy such a big ticket item. And conversely, it does the same way for buying, for the players buying as well. Being like, oh, well, at 75 GP, that means they can pretty readily find healing potions of the common variety. Right, if they need those or any sort of basic supplies, they'll be able to find most tool sets. Really, they'll be able to find almost everything on the adventuring gear list, except with a few notable exceptions, like the spyglass. They probably won't be able to find that. And number of buildings is about 20% of the population. All right, well, we know 10% was 75, so we double that. So there's about 150 buildings in this little township, or right. So quite a few. There are quite a few castles and shrines. So all this is for medieval demographics made easy. If you haven't seen that, search on the internet, you can find it. It's very easy to find. And so these are kind of distilled from those numbers. Kind of tells you about how big a settlement needs to be to have very specific things that we think of being a settlement. The most important one being a tavern. So you get about one tavern per 400 people. So there's one, maybe two taverns in this, 750 person township. There may or may not be a baker, like a bakehouse. People may bake their own bread. There's probably not a stable. And there's probably a couple of temples, but there's probably not a grand temple or cathedral. Or any of these things are up here. Right. There's still, at 750, there's a less than 50% chance that there's going to be even an inn in this little township. Which means you're going to have to make sort of alternative sleeping arrangements. Like maybe you can talk to one of the tavern owners and they'll let you, sleep for a few pennies in their stable, or they probably don't have a stable, right? There's no stable or livery. But we'll let you sleep in sort of like the tap room if they feel like they can trust you, and so you have to instill your trustworthiness with them, sort of thing. Carousing, so I just use a standard 2d6 carousing. I don't really like the 5e one that based off of charisma, because then I feel like the only people who want to do carousing are the people who are charismatic. Rather than when carousing is just, for the most part, what do you guys do in a settlement when you're not actively working on something? This is you just represents, in my mind, just the party members just hanging out in the town. Like maybe they're waiting 3 days for a blacksmith to fulfill an order or something like that. Well, let's see what you get up to in 3 days if you don't have anything specific you're working on. And so I might be like, all right, roll me 2d6 and a d4. All right, so 7 and a 3. So that's over here. So they made some sort of friends with some NPCs they hadn't met before, but they're just kind of acquaintances, nothing of particular note. And then if I wanted to, right, I have a resource where I could look up kind of specifically who that is. And so this carousing kind of depends on how much your lifestyle expense is, right? Like if, for instance, you wanted to try to get a new contact, you wanted to try to build a contact with maybe like a guild master or a noble or somebody like that, well, you need to spend a cost of living that puts you in a bracket in which you're going to naturally run into these people, right? You can't be living on the street and then, right, not paying any upkeep and then try to hang out with somebody who's, you know, on the higher end of society, and like that's not gonna work, right? They're not gonna let you anywhere near them. So that kind of tempers where they end up falling on this table. And so this might be like, oh, you tried to a result like that would be like, oh, you tried to break in with like some people that are sort of in the higher up in some of the local guilds, but you met some people, you had some nice conversation, but you don't really feel like you made any strong connections with anybody. But like they might remember you, right? But they're not going to, right? They're not a new contact. But you also didn't piss anybody off and make a grudge. So that sort of thing. And like in my mind, carousing's not a want to do. It's what you do when you're not doing other stuff. So if you're like, I'm not going to spend this time to work on crafting an item, which I have some quick rules for that I think are as good, if not better, than the ones that are presented in the DMG or Player's Handbook, whichever they want, and especially the ones in Xanathar's Guide where they tried to retool it. I just tried to make it a little bit simpler. The way that my little crafting system works, you can't pull it all the way up, is that it's going to take a number of days equal to the sum of all your check results to reach the full price of the item. So, if you're trying to make a healing potion, and let's say you've got a +5... Alright, so let's say you want to make a healing potion. So it requires half the item's price and material components. Is pretty much straightforward, plus the appropriate tools and workspace. So if you have you have everything you need to, you know, brew potions, or maybe you need to rent a workspace, brew potions in, and that's going to cost you. Say you're going to make a common healing potion, which is 50 gold coins. You need to put forth 25 gold pieces of materials, and then you start rolling. So you need to roll 50, because that's the price, in your check. So let's say that you have a +5. Here, roll. Alright, well that's not a good start. That's 7. That's a little bit better. That's 7 plus in, so 25. Alright, so halfway there. Not great. Probably gonna take one more. Yeah, that would get you at 55. So it takes you 4 days to brew that potion, which I still think is faster than the Xanathar's Guide, which I think requires a week to make a healing potion. And that's crazy too long for downtime. So yeah, it would cost you 25 gold in materials and 4 days in effort, and you'll come away with that common healing potion. And that's based off of your rolls, right? The better you are at the appropriate skill or tool proficiency, the faster it's going to be. And if you have another person who's going to help you the entire time and they're not going to do carousing, you can pull somebody in and they'll give you the help action that allows you to roll with advantage, right? Now you can get it done in maybe like 2 days if you roll really well. Actually, with a +5, you have to roll 2 natural 20s. Get it done in 2 days. Possible, but right, probably gonna take you 3 days. And so then you start looking at items, like if you want to make magic items that are like 1,000, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be like a long-term project. This isn't something like I work on and off, and I have to set aside like a specific day and a specific place to work on it. Pretty interesting. So yeah, and then I have a 2d20 urban dressing, and then of course I have some random encounters. Very similar 1d6 list for the random encounters. Scaled the same way as the wilderness encounters. And say, you know, 2d20, you know, what's going on in town, you know, as you're traveling around town. This is sort of like those random encounters that I use in the solo RPG as Leah and Omer and whoever's with them at the time. traveling across the districts of Cartoonton to go to different places. And then I found out that they'd run into an encounter. This would be one of the things that I might roll on. Or actually, they're running into dressing and not an encounter. So 18 and 10. And again, I roll twice, and I just take the one that seems the best. So we did one that talking about vermin and mongrels. So let's do the cut purse or pickpocket. So maybe they knew Cartoonton really well. So they're like, oh, you dip into a back alley that you know is going to be a shortcut that's going to save you some time. And as you do, you see, you come across sort of the back side of the next street, and you see definitely a pickpocket that's working on people as they pass by and taking things out of it. And then maybe you step in, maybe you help, maybe you just block that, maybe you steal from the stealer. Who knows what PCs are going to do, right? Players do weird stuff. But to give them the opportunity to interact with it and make the world and the city feel like things are going on, even if they're not, related to the actual plot the PCs are after. Those are settlement resources in that cup. There we go. So I got most of it. It got us all the way down through browsing and crafting. And then, if you've been watching the solo RPG, you're definitely familiar with the D100 table, at least by name. This is sort of what it looks like. And this one I think is almost totally made by me. Like, this is just a thing. And there's definitely way more than 100 on here. But it's just like, hey, I need a random person for them to run into. Like, if I wanted to figure out, hey, who's this person that's getting pickpocketed? Can I tell by looking at them? Yeah. You sure can. Let me roll this D100 real quick. 16. Oh yeah, that person's definitely... And you don't know if this person knows this when they're taking that pocket, but that is definitely the tax collector for the area. You're like, oh, maybe it's like a Robin Hood thing, and we only steal from the tax collector. And like, oh, well, I was going to stop in and stop this person, but now I'm like, maybe I don't. Right? Depending on how you feel about taxation in the area, what's kind of going on with the government, and how the PCs are involved. Here's another example. Somebody else to run into. This is what I was using for trying to figure out which of the houses or constructions in the Basilica district might be Harold's contact. Right, I was like, alright, well, let's just roll 3 random NPCs and we'll see. That'll be whose shops and stuff it is. And I could have done that a different way, but because I did it this way. The 92, Casanova-esque lover, a dandy libertine socialite, or tastemaker. So somebody who's incredibly sort of popular in this sort of high society or offshoot anti-high society sort of rings, right? Very libertine. It's got a very Voltaire kind of feel to it, probably. Or, Casanova, right? Somebody who's got a reputation, and not necessarily a great one. It makes me think of Hedonism Bot from Futurama. Same sort of vibes. So yeah, it's a fun little table to be like when you just need a random NPC, and most of these just kind of go by the job, like what they do. Let's do a couple more. Let's do 48, because this table's just fun. I just really enjoy this table. 48. Bather, dyer, or tanner. Okay, so if we weren't on maybe the fringes of the settlement, probably not a tanner, but it could be like a bather or a dyer. Really fun. Like if you played, which one do they have a bunch of dyers in? Assassin's Creed Origin, I think, is the one that has a bunch of dyers in it. Like that's one of the key NPCs. They show up in a lot of villages. You can find them like the big pots with the bright colors all over the place and stained all over the ground and stuff. Have that. That's a really fun one. And 51 is 51. A barber, a folk hero, or a physician. Obviously, that is what we rolled to get Delg, right? And I decided to make him a barber as a physician. So yeah, that's how you use this table. It's a lot of fun. I really like it. There's not much else to say about it. It's a table. And then, right, we talked about this, the D100 shops and markets. Oh, how many times you're like, oh, there's a market in town. Players, you know, whether they're actual, like, live play watchers or not, or maybe, you know, players are just like that. We're like, we're gonna do a shopping episode. And everybody's starting to look for random things in the market, and you're like, okay. And you'd be like, oh, the first shop that draws your interest is, General 72. Some sort of is a pawnbroker. So interesting. So maybe you run into some like secondhand magic equipment, maybe, and maybe that comes with strings attached. People being like, hey, you know, this was stolen, and I want it back, and all sorts of fun stuff down the line. That could be its own sort of like adventure hook through purchase for discount magic items, which is a great way to do it. Magic items that come with strings attached. Well, nothing at the pawnbroker really excites me. What's next? Alright, you keep walking down and you get, what did I roll? A3 or A2? A3. The scribe station is somebody who, you know, writes letters on, you know, maybe on the common people's behalf, who is a person who puts together contracts, things of that nature. Person's probably pretty busy if it's a market. Right, they could be writing, right, and I think there's different levels of scribes, like a very low, like, very acolyte apprentice scribes probably writing, like, lists or reading them out to the people who have letters, like, oh, I got a letter from my family, let me take it to the scribe so they can read it to me, because I don't know how to read. And then the scribe sort of reads back to them. It's got a very, Violet Evergarden kind of feel, where it's like the general population sometimes can or cannot read and write, and even if they can, maybe they're not particularly eloquent, then maybe they want somebody else who's better capable of writing down their feelings, right, their intents, and also making contracts and things like that, doing that and signing off, doing like sort of notary signatory duties, well, things like that. So that could be a fun station. They're like, oh, we definitely should get that one thing notarized, right? Right, something like that, things of that nature. Like, oh, I could get this notary stamp on my, you know, false pedigree for my charlatan character that kind of gives it added legitimacy. Like, ooh, that's a very cool thing to maybe, like, try to do. So yeah, let's do one more. Again, another fun table. 64. Let's do something on the low end. Hey, what's the inverse? 46. Haberdasher, clothier, or tailor. Place to buy clothes. Maybe it could be extremely fancy clothes. Maybe it's, you know, second-hand clothes. Maybe it's very specific. Maybe it's exotic. Maybe it's a specific type of material or pattern, colors, things of that nature. Maybe they do a specific type of clothing item. Or maybe it's a cloak shop, something like that. So, yeah, lots of fun stuff to do with this. I really like these kinds. We're just like, hey, you know, we're gonna go see what's going down at the market. Alright, well, here's some stuff that's going down at the market. Or if, like, hey, we're going to the shops district and, you know, they told us that we need to go shake down the owner of some shop. What shop was that? Yeah, that was, he crushes gemstones and crystals. Interesting. Like, there's a gemstone importer-exporter. And that's the person we need to go, like, shake down for more information. Maybe tied to some sort of smuggling ring or something like that. Right, very useful table, very simple. And yeah, so that was that, and that's basically all the settlement stuff. So after that is sort of in the very back of the middle section, which is these last few pages, are just sort of the shopping list, things like that. Usually these things are going to come up in town, so that's why they're in the place they are, but not always, because they also come up in dungeons, because this also includes the treasure information. or maybe something that I'm looking for in prep. But all the sort of like item stuff's kind of together, and it's pretty much in an area in which you're looking at in which to buy and sell those things, which is usually a settlement. So let's go right here. So this comes straight out of Player's Handbook, but I just use my own shorthand, so you'll see all those numbers kind of look kind of weird. Well, that's because the way that D&D is set up now, which is not how it was used to be set up, is, right, everything, it works on a decimal system, right? 10 copper is 1 silver, 10 silver is 1 gold. Well, that's just the same way that we count dollars and cents in the US, right? So I just make gold pieces the dollar, and then when you look at all this, it's all in uniform. I don't have to add C or G or SP to everything, and you know the straight up price of everything. And then everything that's here that's bolded are the things that technically bolded as well. Like he's got unbolded one. But that's alright. I'm not gonna mess with that one now. So you can see, like, oh, a dagger costs 2 gold. Right? But the Great Club under it costs 2 silvers. Very standard. Sling bullets, you want 20? They cost 4 coppers. Just makes it really, really simple to, like, look at. You don't have to be like, wait, is that a C or an S that's next to it? Like, you're always gonna know cost. Just straight up. A torch, it's a copper. And so yeah, this has most of the sort of like equipment stuff that you would buy with the prices that come out of the requisite books, right? For my own use. And this is all just sort of like your weapons, your armor, and general gear that most players are looking for. Right, we have the ration per day is 5 silver. Light, and then at the end we have room and board rates. So when I talked about, like, if you want to do that carousing, right? Where your carousing is going to depend on how much you spend on your room and board, right? So if you're like, oh, well, I wanted to definitely meet that guild master, right? Well, that guild master is probably going to sit somewhere between this middle to high end on the room and board rates. So I might do 2d10 and then just take whatever's the highest. You're like, okay, yeah, well, you can get the nice room that's in the nice private room and for 9 gold a night. And then when you're positioned in that sort of way, and the appointments there and the things that are offered to you and the people that allows you to interact with is gonna determine how that carousing goes. Now you're like, yeah, well, I didn't make any contacts, but I spent time in that circle, so I'm more likely to be able to ingratiate myself with them again, because now they're familiar with my face, and they know that I have the money to play, right? To show that I belong. And then we go down here, and then shopping for all the other adventuring gear stuff. Straight up, similar. Spyglass, 1,000. That's why we couldn't buy it in that 750 population town. This means that if we use that buying power that you need to get a spyglass, you need to go to some place that has a population of 10,000 people in it to guarantee that you're going to be able to get a spyglass. So if it's less than that, you can still maybe find it, but you have to basically make a roll for it. So, right, we ran in the 750. So 750 of 1,000. We'll just bump it up. So we need to roll under a 75 or under. Say it has it. Well, that's a 6. So yeah, they would have been able to find a spyglass in there. That's just sort of how stuff like that works. But it may be more expensive. I might decide to, because it's really, really rare for this part, maybe bump it up. Bump up the price for it. And then they can kind of try to negotiate it and haggle for it if they want to. And we have all our kits and tools and gaming sets. Cards and dice, right? All that good stuff. So again, very straightforward. Just very much a reference page. Be like, hey, And really, you know, once you get out of the first few levels, they're probably not going to look at this again. They're probably not going to look at this very often. Because there's not going to be a lot of times where somebody's going to be like, hey, what's the cost of a great axe? Like, why would they need a new great axe at that point? They're probably looking for magical gear. So, probably not going to need sort of like mundane gear a lot at that point. So after that, we also have our goods and services and retainers. This kind of tells you some trade good prices, some basic trade good prices. And if you're not doing sort of like the daily cost of living, the thing that we're looking at, which I think kind of varies table by table. I think that's really useful for like downtime stuff, but if they're like, we're just rolling into the bar to get a drink, and right, this is part of the scene, then yeah, that's not going to be included in your daily sort of stuff, cost of living. You're like, oh, well, here you can buy a low ale or a high ale, a low wine or a high wine, a low spirit or a high spirit with their pricing. So if they decide to go to a strictly a tavern, which is a place that sells wine and not beer, you could get low wine or high wine. If it's a very fancy one, you might be able to get some spirits. They're probably not going to serve a lot of ale. Maybe they'll serve the high ale. And then that kind of tells you, like, hey, if you go to, you know, the real dive places, you're going to get that 1 penny ale. Or that 1 silver wine if you're really stretching out, of that 1 gold a shot for that low rot gut spirit. Right, that sort of stuff. And the same thing kind of comes with the meal pricing. If they're like, hey, I want to buy this guy's meal, right, because I'm trying to get the talk out of this, and you're like, oh, well, we're at sort of like a mid-range tavern, alright, that's 5 silvers if you want to pay for his meal. Then we have services as well, that's cabs and coaches and mail and ship passage and unskilled labor. And so we talked about this bit a little bit when we were talking about, when I was making the hirelings in that video. Talking about, hey, you know, if you are asking them to do hazardous stuff, you gotta pay them hazard pay it twice. And if you're expecting them to provide their own kit, you know, you've got to pay them twice again. It becomes very expensive to hire people who want to as like adventurers for you, and you expect them to have their own gear. Which then, in my mind, is like, so that gives you a reason to maybe still pillage mundane gear from enemies. If you want to build up, like if you're doing very much that stronghold style, like we're gonna be in this area for a while, and we're like, all right, well, we're gonna build an armory. That way, when we hire retainers, we can take out one of those cost things by, you know, being like, here, we have this set of armor and this shield and these weapons for you, and not have to pay them the extra for them to use their own stuff. And then, right, the 10% jobbers cut, so they get 10% of the treasure. So, it's good money, right? It's probably better, especially at low adventuring levels. This becomes probably, this is probably more than the party's gonna end up getting paid a lot of the time. If you're hiring expert labor, which I assume most adventurers, I think, fall into the skilled expert labor camp, and you want them to join you on a hazardous journey, and you want them to use their own stuff, and now they're getting paid, you know, 16 gold per day, just right off the top, and then 10% of the treasure you take. Oof. But if you're at a significantly higher level, right, and you're like, actually, we just need somebody to like carry around our crap, and you're like, okay, well, that's unskilled labor. If you just need, and you're not looking for like actual porters who would like help taking care of your like piece of burden, things like that, that would definitely be skilled labor. Let's say you wanted to hire somebody who's going to look after your horses when you go delving into the dungeon. Maybe you want more than one person. Maybe you hire like 2 people. And you're mid-level adventurers at this point, so your coffers are mainly overflowing with gold and nothing to spend it on. You're like, yep, but horses are a big investment. And now you can pay these guys, you know, 4 or 8 gold a day to sit around and make sure that your horses aren't attacked by wolves or stolen by rustlers. And maybe they'll be able to, maybe they'll help you if you call out to them to get in the spot, maybe not. And then you can probably argue that they probably don't get the jobbers cut because they didn't really help getting it there, just watch the animals. Right, there's a lot of negotiation room in there. Kind of help with the RP aspect of everything. And then, right, we have some tax and some animals and vehicles and how much to pay for that sort of stuff. All very straightforward. And magic items. So now we're getting to the last bits. There's sort of like the magic item stuff. The treasure. Which you have probably seen me, if you watch the solo RPG stuff with Leah, you'll have seen me pull up. And use it when we randomly run into a magic item. So this is for pricing. These are just, this is a more tuned take on, like, kind of taking the foundation from 5e's rules as written, and then kind of extrapolating how actually buying and selling magic items, which 5e doesn't really provide you basically any support to do as a dungeon master. It's like here, this costs somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 gold. Well, how do I determine the price of it then? Like, those are very big options. Instead, this, so this is primarily pulled over from the Angry GM, though I think I did make some attunements, some small alterations to this. But basically, it's a thing for you to do major and minor magic items, and it kind of tells you a common price. So obviously, a healing potion is still 50, and it breaks it down by the whether it's a major or minor magic item, the rarity of that item, and then the type of item it is. Right? To come up with a more structured sort of pricing that makes sense, but also, like, it plays off of what I use the BP for, right? Building points. So again, if we were using, you know, that place that's got 750 people on it, and we can only buy things that are up to, you know, 75 gold. Well, the nice thing is that we can probably get everything in this common area there. Probably be able to find permanent most of the time, maybe not all the time. But we'll definitely be able to find common objects that have charges or that are multi-use, and certainly, you know, things that I lost my train of thought. Things that have charges. Right. So this is definitely like your wands kind of area, and this is sort of like, I think the pigments operate this way, where they're like, you have 10 uses of it, or whatever. And then obviously permanent is permanent. So you can definitely see, like, once you get into legendary areas, like, you are probably not going to come across them, unless you go to, like, a major capital city. You're probably not going to come across any city that's large enough to have any legendary items that you can just straight up buy. Like, those are all go into a dungeon and find them kind of things. Because let's say, even on the low side for a minor magic item that's a legendary, so 125, so that means that we had that, that's times the 10%, right? That's the 10%. So you have to have 1.25 million population. So that has to be a major capital city, one of the largest on at least in my world setting, probably the largest, if not the, definitely probably number 2 or 3 largest city in the world, right at that point. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's for a single-use legendary thing. That's like for a legendary potion or a legendary spell scroll. I mean, you totally worth it for a spell scroll, right? Because legendary spell scroll is going to be like a 9th level spell scroll. So, you know, worth it if you could find it and buy it somewhere. But obviously very rare based off the nature of that item, right? That makes sense why it's very rare and almost impossible to find. So yeah, that's that sheet. That just helps you with the pricing, and then right, I allow characters to haggle and try to get a better price or a worse price depending on how well they do. And then this is just sort of my minor treasure table. So this is for treasure that I'm not planning necessarily to give out. Right, this is not like, oh, well, I want these guys to have a magic sword. Right, if I want them to have a magic sword, I'm just going to give them a magic sword. They're like, hey, you guys have been playing for a while, it seems like the fighter character is kind of struggling a bit. We're running into more monsters that have resistance to non-magical weapons, so maybe it's time I just give them a sword. And so, I'm being like, yeah, I just throw a sword in. This is more random treasure that they come across. I use this a lot for sort of Leah's solo adventure because I don't know what treasure is going to be in there, and magical items are still something that they can run across in the system. It's pretty unlikely. So let's say we make one treasure roll per active PC. Let's say, right, we have Leah, she's level 2. So, roll. What type of treasure does she find? Alright. We found the magic item right off the roll. Alright, there's a 10% chance. And she got it. And then here's our magic item by adventure tier. So we'll have to go back and explain some of the other stuff, but that's alright. So I roll another 20. Roll an 8. Alright, so it's some sort of common magic item that you came across. So that's probably going to be... Right, it's probably going to be a potion or a spell scroll. I'll be happy if it's a spell scroll. Because that means she can transfer it to her book. And let's go back and kind of talk about it. But yeah, that's how it works. That was probably not the greatest thing. So magic items come up, currency comes up, so if we had rolled currency instead, I'd be like, alright. Well, it's going to be worth... she's a level 2 character, so a D10 of what type? So a D10... 5 and 17. Right, so she would find 5 gold pieces in that example. And if it was trade goods, it'd be like, okay, well, we do the same thing and then we roll another 20. Roll them all again. 5. I roll 5 again. Oh, that was true. So I get to roll a D20 per adventure tier. Get 13. When the... sorry, I'm myself. Because I'm looking at the wrong thing, Dodo. Alright, so let's go with the 13. So she gets to roll a D50, and the type she found was copper pieces. So, unfortunately, she just found a bunch of copper. How much copper did she find? 26 copper. Yeah. And that's why I like to do these minor treasure packets per PC, so if you travel with a bunch of PCs, right, if there's like 6 of you, you roll 6 times on here, and each person basically gets to find something different. And they can mix and match or do whatever they want with it. Decide whether they want to keep it or not. But if we rolled a trade good, we'd be like, okay, maybe that was worth, you know, whatever trade good we found was worth that 26 copper, so 16 narcotics. So, you know, maybe we find a little bit of like shredded tobacco or some very, very, very vinegary wine, like really bad wine in a flask or something like that. Something that's really cheap. Right, could be something like that. Which can be really different, like, say you could roll really high and be really excited and be like, hey, we're gonna get we're gonna get 100 gold's worth of something. We're gonna get 100 gold's worth of medicine. Okay. Maybe you restock your herbalism kit or your medicine kit, stuff like that. But you can also find some practical stuff that's in there as well. Why I like it. Trade goods. And that's again another one of those sort of like historical verisimilitude things I kind of go for sometimes. I'm like, there's not people just sitting around with a bunch of chests full of hundreds of coins. They want to turn it from currency into wealth, and wealth is stuff that makes money for you. Right, just having some coins in the box isn't going to make you any money, right? That's why we keep them in the bank, because it gets interest. Right, that's one of the reasons we do that. Banks aren't really a thing during this time period, kind of historically. Not quite yet. There's mints in some parts of the world, which work a little bit differently, but are the precursor of banks, or modern banking. So most of the time, if you find something valuable, it's gonna be a thing rather than money. Right? You're gonna find like, hey, you found a bunch of clothing that's worth 100 gold because it's, there's really elegant like fur-lined felt cloak or something like that, and you're like, this is actually an extremely nice piece of clothing that's got a very nice sort of like mink or some other, maybe a beaver, sort of very valuable pelt that's on it as part of it, very valuable fur. You're like, we can sell this for a lot. But it doesn't mean that you have to carry a cloak around with you and keep it in good, standing order. So when you come across something that's like 100 gold worth of flour or grain, you might go, alright, well, how much is that? Well, that's why we have the shopping price list. I think it's in shop. I think it's in this one. No. Wrong one. The goods and services. No. The goblin with my gut. That's where I thought it was. We're saying, hey, I've got this list of ideas of, trade goods costs that comes from the player's handbook in 5e. And you're like, oh, well, we got 100 gold's worth of flour. Okay. Well, just so you're aware of how much flour that is. Flour is two copper a pound. So, that's a lot. That's, let's see. In 100,000. Wow. That's like 5,000 pounds of flour. You found like a gigantic granary's worth of flour. You're like, that's great, and it's very valuable, but how are we going to move 5,000 pounds of flour? Right, so that in itself kind of becomes, in my games, it becomes kind of a different problem. Right, the fact is not that you won't run across, a lot of the times I talk about sort of in DMing that I run a very low money game, and that's both like low hard currency, but there's definitely a lot of valuable items that people will run across, adventurers will run across. It's just that it's packed in such a way that it's incredibly inconvenient a lot of the times. Right, so you're like, oh, well, I can't really take like 1,000 pounds of flour with me, right? You're like, maybe I'm gonna take like, we've got a cart, can we fit like 5 bags in there? And I'm like, sure, you can fit 5 bags of flour. Sorry, that would be 5 pounds. And be like, yeah, you can fit, let's say it was 5 50-pound bags, so 250 pounds of flour into your cart if you want. They're like, alright, we're gonna do that. And then being like, yeah, you guys do know that that's actually not worth a lot of money in the end, and it's gonna take up a lot of room in your cart. Be like, that's, you're talking about, a handful of gold pieces. Like, well, never mind. Yeah. Well, you can use it to maybe restock some of your rations, right? If you want to do that sort of thing. Whereas if you came across something like, oh, you found some bolts of silk, well, that's a lot more manageable for 100 gold worth of silk, right? By the yard, like 10 yards of silk. Like you can. It's a little big for your backpack, but you can make it fit if you needed to, or you could just carry it under your arm. It's not heavy, right? It's not particularly heavy. so you can carry that with you, and that's much better, right? Much less if you found poundage of gold, if you found 2 pounds of gold instead. Or, you know, a 20th of a pound of platinum. Right, those are putting it in your pocket, walking around with it. I don't know, it's, I get that game's probably not for everybody, but that is one of the things that I like, that I think is taken into account too more in sort of the OSR style, but not necessarily like contemporary idea. But I like to think of it, it's very similar in that if you play something like Resident Evil, that has like sort of the inventory management sort of like mini game, like this idea that like your reward is also a game by trying to figure out how to extract the most amount of wealth in the least amount of trouble to do so, right? Like, what is, you have to do this measurement about like how valuable is this thing versus how much of a pain in the butt is to take it with us and resell it. Right, even finding somebody who's going to want that much flour was probably really difficult. I'm sure you could sell it to a noble, right? And maybe you could sell the location to the noble. If you've cleaned out all the bad guys and be like, hey, we're going to sell you this map that's how to get here, and there's a whole bunch of flour down there. You just got to show up with wagons and get it all out of there. And maybe you can sell that. You probably can't sell it out for 100 gold, but maybe you could sell that for 10 gold, and then like with the promise that you accompany the noble there, and then then you get some face time with the noble, and then that gives you the ability to maybe have a new adventure spin off from that as a DM, right? It's all about giving you these interactions or problems that the players get to solve that are going to allow you to create more improvised problems and challenges and solutions and adventures for them. And they feel like everything feels like it happens very naturally, while being both a mixture of planned and unplanned content from your side, right? And then being that, like, oh, that's a very minor side mission that's going to take up, you might not even do that on screen unless you want it to be a thing. Like, if they went and immediately were like, hey, Noble, I'm going to take you to the place where we just murdered a whole bunch of people, and you can take that stuff because we don't have enough manpower to move it. And Noble's like, yeah, let's go right now. And so there's less likely that somebody's going to show up and steal it, or you're going to have to fight with brigands over it, or anything like that. So, or maybe they do wait. Maybe they wait a couple of days and they go back and they find out that like part of it's been stolen, or somebody else has set up camp in there. And right now it's a totally different adventure, and now maybe the noble's pissed off and they think maybe this is some sort of weird ambush from a rival, and now, right, it spirals off in a totally different way. Right, there's a different sort of adventure you guys can go on. But, yeah, I mean, that's sort of how Minor Treasure works for the most part. But I do want to talk about, so we talked about the magic items, and this is how it's set up, sort of like, I set it up this way, so there's a chance that you're going to get rare stuff, and this is based off of kind of 5e, how the DMG tells you to fill out magic items. Again, the DMG for 5e is just so bad, just so bad. It just doesn't give clear examples about stuff. It's kind of like, maybe like this. And that's very frustrating when they're supposed to be like the de facto source of knowledge for their own game system. And they're like, I don't know, maybe just make it up. That's the answer you get. And it's unhelpful. You're like, well, yeah, I can always just make it up, man. That's not why I'm looking in the book. And so this is just kind of split it up by the higher the level the player character they are, the more likely they are going to run into more useful things. As far as magic items go, like higher level magic items. Higher rarity magic items, I should say. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of how that's set up. So, like, let's say it was a level 13 party. Alright, what's this guy gonna get? Level 13 party, so they're still gonna get a common item. They're gonna get a common item that's appropriate for their sort of, well, I guess no, it's just gonna be a common item. So maybe they find a potion of healing. I mean, potion of healing is still a potion of healing. I mean, at that high a level, it's not super useful for you. it might be something that I look at as like, oh, if you wanted to use this as a foundation to brew a better healing potion, you want to do that in your downtime, and then that'll half your material results by that much because you've already got that much made. Like, oh, yeah, maybe. But there's options. It's not supposed to be a dead end. Give them a bunch of useless stuff. You just happen to roll low. And then the bottom is one of my favorites, is the 2d6 pocket content. When players are just like, hey, what does this random bandit have in their pocket? Good question. Yeah, I've really recorded one. They have a flask. Okay. Full of, let's say, uh, 4 coppers worth of drink. Alcoholic drink. Maybe it's got something engraved on it, maybe it's got a personal message, maybe it's got some sort of symbol, maybe it's a specific type of alcohol that's going to be familiar, maybe it's not alcohol at all. Maybe it's like an empty flask of alchemist fire and you're investigating a place that's burned down and you're like, uh-oh, I think we know what started the fire. Right, all sorts of fun stuff kind of show up with that. 11, 6 and 5. 6, 5. Oh, that's one of the good ones. That's one pre-baked adventure ones. You guys can even see it. That's a map. You find a scribbled down map in your pocket. This feels very much sort of like Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed, where you come across like random sort of visual representations of maps, and you're like, oh, there's treasure out there. I hit something here. Want to go find it. We don't know it's treasure. It could be something else. It could be a dead body, right? This is where we buried the body. I don't know why you keep a record of that, but in case you need to find that body later, I guess. Or where we're holding, where our lair is. Right? The map could be to anything, and it may or may not say what it is. It could be a map of the dungeon they're in. This can be really useful. It can be a really useful reward if you're like, oh, I really want to give them this special piece of like this special treasure or something that I had for them, or maybe they were so close to finding this secret passage and then they just missed it by like 1 on the die roll or something like that, and then like you get the map that's like, hey, gives you like a little interaction. You need to pull this book on the bookshelf and it opens up the recess in the wall. They're like, oh, we found the thing that we couldn't find earlier. So yeah, that can be a lot of fun. Gotta have those random things in there. Alright, so what's in the back pocket? So that's everything that's in this middle section. Right. Except for the only thing that we didn't look for in the middle section, or that I couldn't show you, was the Pathfinder 1 random encounters, which is fine. And just for dungeons. They're whatever. You can make up your own if you're that worried about it. But most of the times when I'm running a dungeon, I have a wandering monster chart anyway, so I have one built specifically for that dungeon, so I don't necessarily need the random one unless it's something that I didn't know that I was going to be running. Or they decided to take a weird turn and the monsters that are on this list that I built for the adventure is not going to work because they decided they wanted to climb up and around the cave and see if there was a top way down the shaft instead of, you know, go through the cave entrance that was there. And now I'm like, yeah, but I didn't prepare, you know, combat encounters for the hillside, though obviously I have some hill combat encounters I can pull in here as random encounters. Lots of options. You know, resources for me to go to when things kind of go off the rails like that. They decide to do something weird or something fun, different, and I want to support that, right? That's why I want to be able to have the resources that allow me to improvise that, to reward them for doing it the way they want to do it. Rather than try to force them into this one way and be like, oh, nope, you went to the top of the hill and there wasn't any way in. Yeah, just different. Alright, so the back pocket. The first thing in here is the drop-in NPCs. We talked about that last time. That's where we got Delg from. I don't know if this sheet with Delg on it or not, though, that I have saved in here. May not be. I think it is. Yeah, there it is. There's Delg. So you guys that have been following the solo RPG will be familiar with Delg. We met him in episode 15. He's the barber surgeon that we've been looking for. Tall on the tall side for a dwarf, bit of a beer belly, suffers from sporadic coughing fits. Disinterested in adventuring affairs. Unfortunately, Dove's very much in it, but he's definitely not sharing a lot of information with us because he is generally a quiet, but he is going with the flow, even though he would rather not be on an adventure. He also doesn't want to stay in the city because they're kind of getting to him. And right, that may be one of his fears pulling in, and that's going to get him in trouble. So yeah, I've got that sheet in here. Very simple, straightforward, and basically the way that I use this table is that I might make it longer at this point. It's a little short right now. Sorry. There we go. It's a little short at this point. I'd like it to be a little bit longer because I think if you get long enough, and even if I pulled off the names, I could basically probably reuse the same sheet of random NPCs for a long time. But if not, I can always just scratch them off, and then when I get to the end of the sheet, I just make a new sheet. I have some other tools in here that we'll look at real quick to help to make these. So the parachute file. So the parachute file, I've talked about this one a lot. It's one of my go-to sort of DM things that's in the back pages of my binder, is that every time I'm going to run a session, or not every time, but most of the times when I'm running a D&D session, I will take a look at the parachute file, sometimes I don't need to, and be like, okay, well, they're traveling up into the hills to investigate this old dwarven cairn, because that's something I ran recently. And, so your parachute file, and you're like, alright, so if they completely get off topic or totally screw something up, or screw up the adventure hook, or decide to do something else when they're on their way there, and I have some relevant sort of like one-page adventures to run in case that happens. And so I look at what's in there already and then swap it out if it doesn't make sense, because most of them are based off of biome. So I know they're going into the hills to look after the dwarves and cairn, so I've just got some different potential hillside things that can happen. Hillside adventures, basically. It makes sense. And so, we can take a look at this, because these 2 of the 3 that are in there right now are from here. This is Tyler Monahan, and he has these really great one-page adventures. I believe these are, yeah, they're all completely free. You can get 60 of them. So let me just go to the PDF real quick. And of course you can buy them on DriveThruRPG as well. If you want to buy them, they're all free. You can just download the PDF from his website if you want. And this is the newer version. I don't have copies of the newer version. The ones I have are of the old version. They're a bit rough. And these are definitely, he's definitely glossed them up a bit for the revised edition. But it's 61-page adventures. They're broken down by biome. They're from levels 1 to 15. Right. Environment pages, exploration stuff, success and failures, and it tells you how to run them. Very simple, very sort of like 5-room dungeon-esque, like one-session dungeons. Right. You can be like, okay, well, I want something that's in the swamp, and something that's a ruined temple, and right, something like that, something that will work. So, like, say, let's go with the like shipwreck thing. So I said the shipwreck thing first. Remember earlier? So I could go in and be like, oh, I want to use this pirate ship one. Right? We were just talking about maybe there's an overlooking cliff, and they have that rock that swings by and goes by. Maybe they wheel around and look up, and they can see that the shrine that's sitting on the cliffside. If they go in to investigate, and from up there they can see the wreckage. Alright, so that's one, just right off the bat that we could have used, right? There's another coast one. Let's see what else we got. Have ruined temples, good one, an underwater one. The underwater one. This is for swimming around, so if they want to swim down underwater looking for that treasure, if you wanted to do that instead, right, you can do it that way. Good job, William. Okay. And then, oh, sunken ruin right there. And there's literally just a sunken ruin. Maybe they told you it was a shipwreck, and then you get down there and you're like, this isn't a shipwreck. Right? And now I've got boom, boom, boom. 3 coastal or underwater things I can throw together. I can throw that in the back of the page. Be ready to run that session. Like, no problem. And that's the thing is that a sunken ruin can show up anywhere. Really. I mean, this one's very coastal. Right, you've got sharks and stuff in it. But you could change that and make the sharks into, like, crocodiles or something like that. And, like, you're like, oh yeah, it's in this little swamp section. And there's all sorts of nasties hiding under the water. Maybe big snakes, things like that. Kind of stuff. It's one of the reasons that I like Tyler Monahan's work is that because they're so short, they're pretty easy to pull some audibles on and switch some things in and out without really screwing stuff up too much. Because there's not a lot of stuff. Unlike a full-blown adventure that you bought was like a full module of multi-session play. And you're like, oh, well, I made this one change in the first 2 hours of the session, and then, right, you get 10 hours into the adventure, and you're like, oh, actually, I made that change, and it completely screwed up this section of the adventure, and now I've got to figure out how to fix that. Right, you don't have that problem with these short, sort of, like, insertable adventures. And all of these can go, right, the nature of these adventures is that he's designed them in a way in which they drop in very easily into any type of, like, campaign. They don't really give you anything that tells you, it's very, like, lore or world-setting perspective. Like a werewolf den, you can have a werewolf den in basically any campaign setting. From, if you're running Curse of Strahd, all the way to, Forgotten Realms, Sword Coast stuff, Eberron. I'm not as familiar with Spelljammer, but I'm sure you could have some sort of werewolf den on the Spelljammer planet, I guess. So, lots of interesting stuff. But yeah, so those are sort of the parachute file when things just kind of go off the rails, and I'm like, alright, well, you guys are here, so in this sort of area, so this is what you run across, and just kind of go from there. And they're sort of balanced, but also not really balanced, which I think is actually a strong suit for them in this capacity. You're like, hey, it's very much like playing a game like an Elder Scrolls style game where exploration has such a heavy influence in it in a video game. And it's like, yep, if you just explore, you're going to run into stuff that's way over or under your level, depending on what you do. So having them run into a den of werewolves as level 1 characters, they're going to be like, oh, we should probably give this one a miss. And again, as a DM, it's on you to be like, hey, you guys wouldn't know, generally as people in the world, that werewolves are a much more serious threat than, say, goblins. And you know that most stories of people who mix with werewolves do not end well. Right? Then let them use that information. Like, because we don't want them to accidentally get themselves into trouble, because especially modern player mindset is that if there is a group of monsters that's placed in front of us, it's supposed to be of a challenge that makes it fightable. Which is very different from very much the older editions of D&D's sort of purview of thought, being that the world is a big and changing place, and there are monsters and creatures of all different scales of challenge and danger to humans and other humanoids. So, like, yeah, you can just get wrecked by a dragon. Like, if you screw around and you're like, hey, that's a big dragon, we should fight it. When you go try to fight the big dragon kills you all. Is that really the DM's fault? Especially if the DM's like, I don't know, that's a pretty big dragon. Again, don't beat around the bush, just be like, hey, you guys should know, power-wise, that's a very big dragon. That's categorically, that's a large dragon. That's not a level 3 party kind of fight. And then they'll be like, oh, okay. But maybe we try to do a Hobbit thing, we try to steal the thing, and it becomes a different sort of not combat encounter kind of scene or adventure, right? And that can be fun too, if that's the way they try to do it. But maybe agents of the dragon then go after them, and you can have all sorts of fun like that. So I did want to talk about the quick fab NPCs, which is what I use to basically build the drop-in NPCs. This is probably the thing that I'm probably going to end up taking out of here. I actually thought I had already taken it out of here. I just included it because it was in here. But I don't really need this sheet for playing D&D like at the table if I already have the quick fab NPCs. But these are the sort of things that I use to build those quick fab NPCs if I need to. I just realized, you know, making one of those at the table kind of takes too long. And it's nicer to just be able to just sort of grab it and drop it down. And being like, oh, well, once I get back and I scratch out that one, so now I'll just make another one to go after it. To replace the one I just got rid of. And so yeah, and very strange. It's got some names on it, some very gobbledygook kind of names, and just some very quick roll tables real quick. And then some sort of extra stuff that you want to add down here, which is quick to fit. So like if I wanted to give them a background feature, I can give them some skill proficiencies or expertise of one thing, or food language or tool proficiencies. Basically give them a background because that's what player characters have, and that kind of assumes that that's what NPCs have as well, basically. So a commoner who's, you know, a guilder probably has skill proficiency, you know, in the skill they're doing. Maybe they have expertise if they're a master. But maybe they have that, and maybe they have like persuasion for like diplomacy, things of that nature, trying to make deals. Right, and they've got their proficiencies and their skills and some sort of background feature, which, you know, in this case would be their sort of guild membership. But then it's sort of like height and attitude, their body type, memorable NPC elements, sort of kind of basic personality kind of information, and then like what sort of ancestry they are. Very straightforward. So really the last thing that's in here in the very back is the laminated forever dungeon, which I went over a little bit previously, I know. And I don't have a digital copy of this right now. But they just have basically the forever dungeon, and I know we've gone over this in another video. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But it's basically set up as a big sort of like, player's really bad. Kind of set up as a geomorph, so you can see that the passages extend off the ends, and then it's laminated, so I can take a marker and just like cut swaths out of it. So I'm like, oh, I only need like a 4-chamber dungeon because we're getting towards the end of the session. I'll be like, oh, well, here, 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 right, and then, oh, well, that would run off, so maybe it also goes to here. Maybe this isn't a secret passage there, and then I can just, with my marker, like make the outline and be like, okay, not here, secret passage here, and then number the rooms real quick, and then as they go through them, I can sort of populate the rooms with encounters, right, because I have those improvised traps and hazards, and then I'll have some sort of like wandering monsters, or if I need to use Kobold Blood real quick, or something D&D Beyond to really just make a quick encounter, I can build that really quickly, and then we can get on with playing this dungeon in just a few minutes, right? It's one of those things, this is one of these tools where I'm like, okay, you guys have decided to zig when I thought you were going to zag, so let's take like a 10-minute break. During that 10-minute break, I'm just going to create this small dungeon and stock it real quick. And I can make it whatever I want. This can be underground, overground, some sort of complex, a vault, a mine, whatever it needs to be. And then I've got a bunch of tables on the back. They're all handwritten now right now. Be like, oh, here's the type of doors that are in here. Here's the type of treasures. Here's some, right. I have those same sort of hazards and tricks and traps tables on the back here, just so I don't have to keep flipping through the actual binder to do that. I have everything I need right here, and I can just quickly scribble on it. Including the dungeon dressing, some doors, stuff that I got from the dungeon creation thing that we've gone over before, chamber contents, what's actually in it, all that good stuff. And so, you know, in a very short break, other than maybe stocking it with encounters, like, I would probably leave that to last. But other than stocking it with finite encounters, I could probably bang out a small dungeon for a session in just a few minutes, right? You just take a marker and get going to it and just start rolling on things and fill in the tables, and then be like, okay, I know there's a monster encounter in this, or there's a creature encounter in this room, so then I figure out what type of creature that is, and kind of do that more on the fly. Assuming I have a digital resource. I wouldn't need like a Wi-Fi laptop for that to do it offhand. Unless I just wanted to use one of my dungeon things in here, but those would be very generic. But I could do that, if I needed to, if I really needed to. But otherwise, I would take the time to do that really quickly by hand. And that is, I think, everything. That's the last thing on our list. That's basically everything that's in this game binder. I hope you guys really enjoyed taking a look at it. I found it to be really useful. Like I said, I've been using it for the better part of a year right now. Both running, and I even take it with me when I'm playing because it's got those rule references in it. And I'm like, right, but like, what does paralyzed actually do again? I'm like, you know, I have the information. Let me just look it up real quick. I can be like, oh, I know exactly where it is because it's my DM binder. I know it's right on the front page. Be like, paralyzed, alright. I'm incapacitated. I can't move or speak. I auto-fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Attackers have advantage on their attacks against me, and adjacent attacks from adjacent creatures are auto crits. I don't want to be paralyzed. I need to figure out how to not be that. Right, so even from the player's perspective, it's very useful. So it's just something I carry with me to all my games. And you know, if I have friends with me, if they want. They're also looking up rules, and then I can help them look up rules to find out where it is. In my quick reference, I can do that very quickly. Or prices of items. Like, there's no reason the DM needs to be looking up basic shopping prices for like rations. I'm like, I know what that is. Let me just hold up real quick, and we can do all our like general side shopping stuff very quickly. Kind of pass these sheets around. But yeah, that's everything. Like I said, we're gonna get back to the solo RPG stuff. I hesitate to say this week. My schedule has been I have been very. August was a very, very tough month. Just in general, it was a tough month, and what is proving to be a very tough year for me. Don't want to go into too much detail, but you know, things have been very, very tough this year, and continue to be for the foreseeable future on very, very many fronts. So doing our best here, but you know, I do have the information. Like I said, I need to go over the last little bits of like the live notes I was taking before that stream went down to make sure that I capture everything that I have captured, so we don't end up running over as much of the same ground. But I have reviewed the previous episode. Wasn't ever able to get the additional content back. It was all screwed when the computer failed. So we will get back to that. It's just, I can't promise it's going to be this way. But hopefully the next stream will be that. That's my plan anyways. And one of the big announcements that was in the previous stream that got corrupted is that I've removed the schedule for Twitch, because I found out I did spend a lot of time looking at my analytics between Twitch and YouTube, and the truth is that that audience is just on YouTube for this type of content. So I'm putting more emphasis over there, which means that I don't really need to keep a consistent Twitch streaming schedule, so I can just kind of do these whenever I feel, like today. Right? I had extra time today, so I could do that instead of trying to force a very specific time slot on very specific days, but in the end not thing that builds anything on the Twitch side. Nature of the beast. But yep, that's everything from my end. I'll see you guys soon. getting back into this and need to edit a bunch of stuff, get that up on YouTube. And frankly, I've been a little gun shy on that since, you know, the computer issues, trying to put it under the editing strain. But everything seems to be doing really well with the new computer. I mean, it's still the same computer, but it's mostly new parts now. And it's a new Frankenstein. But yeah, so next time we should be good. I need to edit those videos and start getting them up, and hopefully we will get some traction on this next week. I do have a bunch of stuff going on this next week, but it just kind of depends on how things fall into place right now. Everything's very much up in the air. So, but as soon as I know, you guys will probably end up knowing. So, yeah, stick around. Follow me on Twitter, even though I haven't posted on Twitter in it feels like 2 weeks. Like I said, been busy, got a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, we'll be back, we'll hit it. Again, it's going to be very impromptu, so I understand if you're not catching the live streams. Hopefully, you guys can go over to the YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube, and that's going to be the easiest way to get this content. That way you can watch it whenever you want to, and for free, and I can create it whenever I have the ability to, rather than trying to make specific days and time periods work, which they really haven't been. So yeah, that's that should be everything. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, bye.